First thing that I'm going to show you is three tools really quickly. One, hopefully, that you can see what probate in Montana looks like. Raise your hand if you can see that. Okay, thank you. That's the third thing that I've given you today. I'm going to go back again to the next thing, which is kind of the main from me, the probate, the process, and a way to approach it with great expectations. This will give you at least a pretty brief outline. It tells you where you want to use your handout, etc., for at least two of the handouts. And then the third thing that I guess that I want to share with you would be this, and it's my timeline for Mary Lake, my great-great-grandmother. So hopefully you have that. I'll go back now and go to the presentation, hopefully. And raise your hand if you can see that. Thank you.
It's a little bit weird.
Oh, no, I'm going to fix it. Hopefully, I'm going to fix it to the slideshow from the beginning. How's that now? Okay. All right, so here we go. This is what I call one of my toolbox skills, learning probate essentials, because what you're actually learning is a process. You're not just learning certain things, but you are learning the tools that are necessary to really be able to do this. And so I want you to look at every document type as an opportunity to expand your skills, because before you can become that genealogist extraordinaire that you want to be, you're going to have to learn certain things, and you're going to have to learn processes and begin to gather them together. And every time I've figured that I've known a total process for probate, yep, I found something else. I found another court that I needed to go to. I found another place where there were more instruments. And primarily, how did I find those? With indirect references right within the particular probate that I was attempting. So let's just say, like me, you want I actually want my great grandmother's will and probate in this. And so I expect to find in this one too, a child born out of wedlock and dead. I did not. But I expected maybe there would be a will or a probate. The first thing I have to tell you is, nope, I didn't find a will. So we're into a different process right away. But could I still do a probate? Was there still a probate? Yes, there is a probate, because probate still covers the process of what happens after a person dies and you're trying to close out certain aspects of their life. You're going to need to do your due diligence and write summaries, write everything that you can think of so that you get to the processes that you want. It's very important. So what is probate? Friend James Tanner, lawyer and genealogist, notes in his briefs that probate is a set of court or government procedures established for the orderly transfer of property of a deceased person to that person's heirs or assigns. That's in his book, The Ins and Outs of Probate for Genealogists, at Family History Expos in 2015 and again in 2023. Probate is a process. It has many, many documents, and you're always going to want to make sure you save everything, all the notes that you find, all the indirect references, the things that you can find in newspapers, and put them in some kind of logical order. And I admit it, I use timelines because it forces me to write the stuff down, not just say, I'll do it later. So that's the process that works for me. And know that each process and each probate is going to be unique to the particular situation. For my mom, it was as easy when she died as saying, my mom only has some monthly bills. We have to make sure that her Social Security is turned back. It was, and that was it for us. And we were lucky because we're in Montana, and Montana is a state that obeys and has the law primarily with the Uniform Code. Not that lawyers won't attempt sometimes to add a little in. I'm asking again that you be aware of the current knowledge you have, and you add to your knowledge as you go after each and every type of document. That's why I talk about these processes, because as you learn more, it's just going to add so much to your enjoyment of genealogy, but also your plan for where you go next whenever you're doing your next family, working with your next family, or working with documents from various places. I'm still using FamilySearch.org, their research wiki, because it will give you a way to get to probate process. Now, one thing I really like about the family search process is when you get into the research wiki, if you just put in probate process, it's going to bring up every country across the world. Wow, that's great. That's really a good thing for it to do. So if you want the probate process for Hungary or for France or for Australia, you have the means to get to that process through FamilySearch.org. And I think that's really a grand scheme. They keep their stuff pretty well up to date. One of the first things you need to do, and you're going to need to work with very carefully, is getting the terminology. Keep a list of terms close by that your state that you're going to research in actually uses. If you're Pennsylvania, if you're there, you might be using what we would regard in Montana as some obsolete terms. So you need to be very careful of looking at and saying, okay, I need to work with the terms I see. I need to go back, maybe go out to YouTube's or a YouTube video. They've got a lot of 2 and 4 minute videos for certain states that say, okay, here's what's different in this state, or here's what they've never done. But the probate terms will change through time. Mainly there's additions. There's very seldom ever a subtraction. So without further ado, I want to show you my husband's family. They were in Norfolk County, Massachusetts, really, really early on, from about 1695 forward. I was interested in his Page family, in trying to see what might be available. And if you notice, I retrieved this stuff in 2016. I'm deliberately showing you some things that were available then because the best that I could get was at that point a look at what was available. So, of course, the first thing that pops up here with me is this dude, Charles Jr., in the year of 1815 in the town of Stoughton, Norfolk County, Massachusetts, being declared a lunatic, with the number of the file being 13874. Well, of course, who wouldn't want to know that right away? Now, is that part of a probate? Yeah, his probate actually starts early on when you began to gather his information together. He was a frustrating case. I could find little about him other than the fact that family members kept him, supported him, and he lived with them throughout his life. I would have been better off probably to have gone to Charles Jr., again, that's him in 1841 when he dies, and there is a type of will that was put together for him. And it's very sparse. It's very sparse, just as frustrating. Number 13877. But I digress. How you read and process a document determines your depth of understanding. And I immediately I went for the one lunacy. I'm not, I wanted to know immediately what happened to Charles Jr. He was supposed to be, and he was the first one born in the family. What had happened? Was he kind of not there right from birth? Could we find him later so that he had an accident? Well, I'm going to let you in on the suspense right now. I never did find out why. I just found out that the family deemed that he was a lunatic, but they kept him at home. Now you're going to miss a lot if you don't know will and probate laws for the time and place. And there was very little to do with this probate. There were just very simple things that the family could do in Norfolk, Massachusetts at that point to declare him a lunatic. It didn't take long. It went through the process in about 10 days. And then I didn't see any more about this person other than he was in someone's home up through 1840. At least I'm assuming he was one of those tick marks on their census reports because, of course, he dies before 1850. So I'm not going to see him actually listed. I'm assuming that at certain times he's in uh, uh, his father's home and then he's also in a sister's home at one point. But wait, what's the process or the reason for these probate parts? I needed to look up those state laws in Massachusetts for the time period, 1815. We were a brand new country, and our laws in New England were still pretty much from the colonial laws, it's sticking pretty carefully with it through the time that he dies. So I was not going to find a lot. Remember, by then, New England, even with its colonial setting and background, we already had about 8 generations by then that by 1841 that had been living in what we call the New England area or Massachusetts. So there was a lot there in different kinds of files and so on, but mainly it referred to other people, not to him. So I went and did the recommended things. I went and found the names of his siblings and children. He didn't have any, and his siblings' children. So I knew the familial ins and outs, and I could recognize some of those names. Yes, there was always a Charles in each succeeding generation. Boy, did that help. A lot of them, though, lived far away. They ended up in this place that was actually related to Massachusetts because in colonial times it was claimed by Massachusetts. They ended up in Illinois. Many of them did. So they had very little to do with him through 1841. So I had to make that timeline where he was seldom mentioned. I had to follow family members until he was mentioned again at his death, and it was hard. Here's what I have in my system, in my Roots Magic system. So I have him as Charles Page Jr. His parents are Charles Page and Mary Wales. And just so you know, his dad remarried after his mom died at a point. These facts have only to do with Charles Page Jr. I've got his birth in Walpole. I found him in one census as a tick mark at the age of 9. Didn't know yet that he was adjudged incompetent because that came quite a bit later. Notice he's finally taken into court. They've done a court record when Charles Jr. is 34 years old in 1815. He was adjudged incompetent and his father became his guardian. So be aware that when you have guardianships, they're part of a probate. And so sometimes, as in Pennsylvania, they can even be held separately. So you need to be very, very careful of looking for all the documents you need. A probate packet may not name everything. You need to continue your skills, especially if you see a big gap in information when a probate is rendered. He dies at the age of 59 in Stoughton. He's buried in the Pearl Street Cemetery at Stoughton. And there is a will. It's minimal. It just says he has nothing, but his dad made sure that something was filed. And that's pretty much it for Charles Page Jr. I'm telling you, it's frustrating. This one is. So probate's a process. Get the law. I got the law from Montana. The Montana legislature actually did a pretty good thing. They passed the Uniform Probate Code, the UPC, and they were one of the first 15 or 16 states that did that, providing for rules to simplify probate in a district court. In Montana, then, we're lucky because formal approval by a court is not required if there's an action already authorized in that UPC law. So, for example, in Montana, I can tell you that when I worked with my sister-in-law in 2008 to take care of my brother's estate, he made a will just a few weeks before. And so we were able to go to the courthouse in Flathead County at Kalispell, go up to their reading room where they had a computer that said, not answering any questions as a lawyer, but here's the total process. Just keep these papers right in order as they are printed. Print the total packet, return it, take it to district court, and the process will begin for you. So we did that. There was a whole ream of papers. It just kept shooting stuff out. We paid for our copies. We left the courthouse in Kalispell. We went home and kept the papers in order and began filling those things out. And Betty went just a week or two later back in and officially asked for the process to begin. She paid, I believe, something like $600 total for that process, and it only took about 6 months. Because look at this law here. It says under Montana law, probate can be administered as an informal proceeding. Well, that was my mom. When she died, we just paid her bills and that was it. And we were legal. We were fine and ready to go. It can be a formal procedure. Now, we wanted that formal procedure with my brother's estate because prior to a quitclaim deed by all of us who are in the same generation and were his siblings, we had all filed and said Gary and Betty owned the family cabin in Ferndale, and we wanted to make sure that that process was formalized. So it was in the will. It's mentioned again. All of the quitclaims are there by my siblings and myself because there were 4 of us left. So that's why we chose that formal procedure, but it was still a pretty easy process to go through. 6 months later, Betty had completed everything, and the court declared that my brother Gary's probate was final. It can be by supervised administration, say by a public administrator. In the case of a person dying with a will or without a will, but without anyone around them that's been named to take on that process. Or it could be by supervised administration through a court-appointed person in the family. It could be by collection of personal property, by affidavit. I haven't seen that one. I have not seen an example of that, so I can't show that to you. Or as a small estate summary administrative procedure. That pretty much happens with most of Montana. The idea of a formal procedure, very, very brief, or that small estate summary administrative procedure, because there's really nothing to go through. We could have done that with my mom. We weren't too informed at that point in 1977. And so we did it as an informal proceeding and it worked for us. The Model Uniform Probate Code for the United States was formulated by the American Bar Association and suggested and put into law by legislatures beginning 1969. In 64, the American Bar Association knew that they were getting hit frequently by people saying, why is this probate process so expensive? And why do I have to do so many things? And why did the lawyer just charge me this in this process? So there'd been, of course, contentious times. There'd also been the admission that at that point, we had all of these states and they were pretty much operating on their own and had their own processes. And it wasn't working in many ways. There were many complaints. So the Uniform Probate Code, its purpose in the first place was to take care of gross abuse of billing practices. That's what the ABA said. And also any scare tactics that were formulated. One of the most interesting things that James Tanner told me was that there were so many people who were afraid that their money would be taken by the state if they did not have a probate process. Now, he says that's actually, it actually seldom happens. It can happen. It can happen, but it seldom happens. What's important for you to know is that that Model Uniform Probate Code of 69 is only adopted by 16 states in full. So you're going to want to go out and look at the states. California adopted part of it. You'll have states who say that they adopted all of it, but they didn't, so be very careful. The remaining states have adopted portions, however, of that Uniform Probate Code. Every single state has, but in a piecemeal fashion. So I'm just telling you, it's my warning. It's my yikes. Be very careful, because what you learn about probate and the process for your state is going to determine how much you are going to get, or what's available to you, or it's also going to determine whether or not you go to some separate courts to find all of the documents. You might have to play a bit of pickup. But you can go out to Wikipedia, right out online, just Google it for Uniform Probate Code to get more, and it'll give you a list there of states and what people are doing. I really like James Tanner's thing here, and I do not have this for you in your handouts today. His is genealogystar.blogspot.com. And he gives some pretty sane advice with some salient points. And then he'll remind you, just as he did me, ease up on yourself. Do you all have that? I'm going to go forward. Probate processes and rules then vary from place to place, really. So first thing you want to know is go out and find that list. Did that state or that province or that country adopt some kind of a uniform code rule? Because across the world, even with the European Union, there's now uniform code. So you're going to want to look at what's there today, because it will lead you back to what was in each one of those countries. For the United States, the first thing to know is if they did not adopt uniform code rules, what permitted changes or additions did they make, or what did they keep? And what are the things from the uniform code that they took in? You can do that again by going out to familysearch.org and putting in the state's name with probate rules. Look to see what courts are responsible to keep the wills and the probate, the guardianship information, and what court rules. I mean, you will see that there are courts that can be named straight probate courts, or you can see courts that have kept older names but are still responsible for these particular things that are happening with the decedent's demise. I also like another little place called www.weareatticus.com. Neat little play on that if you're aware of court proceedings through life. weareatticus.com. I'm going to remind you again, this uniform code is still in process. So you can go out to Amazon, for example, and pull up things like this with how to probate an estate in California, a step-by-step guide. And that's going to tell you some things that, tells you right away, if the guide is only 35 or 40 pages long and it says we follow the UBC, you know that that state is doing that particular thing. You're going to find all kinds of things when you look out there. You can do how to probate an estate in Florida, how to probate a estate in various places, or you can look at things like the probate process, how to handle problems. One of the things that Tanner reminds me of is that one of the things that happens, first of all, is There's usually problems when people want to fight, or when they think something wasn't fair, or they cause a little minor tizzy or a major tizzy, which can make things go on for several years. It can also happen even with the Montana Uniform Code, where my friend Shari is probating her mom's estate, when family members write formally that they will wait until the spring, 2 years following their mom's death, before they finalize, so that one sister has time to make plans in her life to figure out what she's going to do. And yes, that's there in the court, and it's been accepted right down there in Silverbow County. Probably one of the most funny books about probate, and I understand you can get at least part of this online, is How to Avoid Probate. It was put out in 1966 by Norman Dacey, prior to the ABA going to that thing of a uniform probate code. It gave the perfect rationale, and it set the stage for the ABA's attempt, I'm saying attempt here, at a uniform code for probate, because those things are still not settled. I mean, there's issues that law schools teach and that probate follows, but always be aware that states can add or change things, and you do want to start from where they are today, going backward. It really doesn't take long, but it really can help you not only with these documents, but with all the documents that might be in that particular set of papers. He says again, the size and the value of an estate, ability of the heirs to agree among themselves determines the need for a short process or an elongated probate process. In short, do you want to fight or do you want to agree? That's what's going on frequently when you see something going across times. And before we had a standardized probate process, or at least the means to look at what should be commonly there, what is commonly held across all the states, then what you might have is a process that could go on for years. I'm talking decades. This is my pitch. Make a timeline of that process you find. I'm going to show you my Mary Lake probate process. Mary Lake was my, or is my, was my great-great-grandmother. I only knew a few things about her, and that was even from my Aunt Marge driving all the way to Michigan to get a record back in the 60s. Bless my Aunt Marge. Mary Lake, my great-great-grandmother, died intestate. There was no will. She didn't expect to expire. She was working in the neighborhood in a grocery store and living by herself. Her kids were gone from the home. So she didn't even have a list of the things she owned that she just did not necessarily have in a will, but she wanted these particular things to go to someone, you know, like the picture on the wall, or that little statue that she'd always had, or that particular thing that was given to her as a child that she still had on the mantle. Well, her daughter Ella happened to live in Michigan too. The time is 1906. So I started with what I knew about Mary in her personal timeline in my genealogy program, and I use Roots Magic. But Legacy is pretty much the same. Family Tree Maker is pretty much the same. If you're using anything online to keep track of stuff, they're worth it. I'm just going to give my pitch here and say, I really am going to advise you not to put a family tree out that you expect to own at places like Ancestry, because later on, when you no longer are subscribing to it, it's there, but you can't get to it. So you want to make sure that your program is someplace else and that you have the full control. Well, here's my Mary Ann. And at this time, she'd gone through two husbands. The first one died, honest. He died. And Joseph Brooks Lake was her second husband. Her maiden name had been Mary Ann Plant. She was the daughter of David Plant and Julia Ann Fortier. born in 1841 in York or Whitchurch, York, Ontario, Canada. And she had proceeded through her life coming to actually to Michigan in 1881 and claiming her kids claimed they'd always been there. That's part of Liar Liar's Pants on Fire's story. That's not true. Uh, that he'd been born in the United States. He wasn't. None of them were. And so you see her in 1884. She's living in Bay City, Michigan. Uh, and Joseph Brooks Lake is her husband. He's a painter, commercial painter at that point, going out and slapping paint on buildings, which he'd also been in back in Canada, where they had lived in Victoria County. I found some interesting things. I did not know about fact one, that on November 29, 1899, she declared her second husband insane and had him committed. So in this case, this tiny, tiny little packet that I got also explains some things to him. She died on October 4 of 1906. She was buried, and her daughter, Ella, promptly started the probate process, which is what really helped me to find out about some other things of this very interesting family. So if you've got my timeline of the probate of the estate of Mary Lake in front of you, it will really help you. I did that timeline by examining the court records, examining the particular process. Here he's allowing me to steal one from him. And if you notice, I started in 1906, where on October 5, Ella Mae Nickel informs Bay County Probate Court of her mother's death on October 4, and that her mom died without a will or testament. So Ella Mae, who was a newlywed at that point and living up in another part of, on the other peninsula, actually, in Michigan, she informed them that her mother died without a will or testament, and she listed the heirs at law as, and this is where I got the goodies, Joseph B. Lake, her husband, age 63, residing at the Pontiac Asylum for the Insane, and then Fred Bennett, son, 42, of New York City, W. George Bennett, aka Liar Liar Pants on Fire, age 40, of Kenmare, North Dakota, and Ella Mae, age 30. And it was just a little 2-page document, honest to goodness, nothing else. But boy, did that give me information. So I could look at it, and on that 2-page document, there's that little notice, State of Michigan. Notice is hereby given that by an order of the probate court made on the 9th day of November, 1906, they allowed 4 months from that date for creditors. I'm just going to say many states allow 6 months or later if the judge says there ought to be more time because there's a contest or something, for all creditors to present their claims to the probate court for examination and allowance, and they'll be heard. The other thing that happened is that she pretty much was permitted to make a list, I presume, of what was in her mom's particular thing. Now, if you notice, if you're looking at this, I can only go so far with this, but Bay County Soldiers Relief Commission is the body that commonly examined claims when there were claims in the county so that the judge could keep them separate and then rule on that claim. So here was this Bay County Soldiers Relief Commission in the matter of the estate of Mary Lake, examining everything that Ella Mae had put down that she had done in order to begin to settle this estate. And notice she was pretty much working right through October and November of that year and pretty much had things in order. And then she said, okay, in doing this, I'm Ella Mae Nickel. I'm the administratrix, and my total for all the things that I had to do while I was attempting to do this, coming back, I had to be in a hotel part of the time, and that was $2 for the night to be in that hotel. I am asking the court for $56.42 as my part of the bill, and it was allowed. That's a very, very interesting thing to see and to see what's there. No, I haven't gone out and looked at what that would cost today, but it was subscribed and sworn before a notary public, and they appointed two citizens at that point as appraisers because she did have real estate. She did have some real estate, chattels and credits. And right away, they appraised it, and she asked for a license to sell the real estate to pay the debts. And I found out her current address when I saw that, which was really cool to see, because so far, this whole file for me has only existed of about 10 or 12 pages total, even with everything, with the order from the court. It was very small. Then she took an oath before the sale on December 31 of 1906 that in disposing of the real estate, she was authorized to license and sell it on December 28th. So she was saying, I want this done. And so there was a testimony of freeholders on the sale of real estate at privacy sale. And it's just very brief. It's 3 lines. Just says, yeah, it's about worth this much. Not a lot. Proof of publication was done. And if you could notice through 1907, it actually followed through all the way to the proof of publication of the probate order, and everything was finalized by December of 1907, which is still 14 months after her mom died. But she was able to do that. And on the way, I was able to find some really interesting things. I knew that they all got $240 or $250 a piece, the 3 kids, and assuming also that the husband got a portion, but his was at the asylum. But she acknowledged that her friend Fred Bennett had not been found by December 2 of 1907. That guy was evidently living in New York City. I've not found him yet. And $250 of the estate would belong to him. So she deposited that sum with the Bay County treasurer, less 100%, $100 in court fees. So he was down to 150. I've never been able to find out if that was ever claimed, or if did the state or did the county finally get that money. I didn't find him. I just wonder if they did. But that's what I did as a timeline, to be able to work my way through the process and see the end of what should have been a pretty easy way to settle this process. Along the way, I found the moves that she made. Ella May had recently married a medical doctor. She was living first up in the other peninsula. Then they moved to Iowa. Eventually, I find her out in California, where she dies. The probate packet for Mary Lake was very thin, and I assembled that. The newspaper really helped me, and Ella really helped me because she was very good with being careful to list every single thing she did. What a lady. She also died out in California much later. Here's the things I found that helped me with other documents. I then went and got that petition that she made for Joseph Lake to be declared insane. It wasn't in the probate, but I could find that document. I could find the news articles about his cruelty and his outlandish behaviors to other neighbors where he threatened them, his attempts to kill Mary. By 1899, here's how the sheriff describes him: suicidal, melancholic, and he threatened to kill Mary and to kill himself. So he was taken in by the sheriff, and he was in jail for several months before they finally got the process initiated. The process was to have him declared insane was done right away, but it took some time before it was acted on by the court. So he sat in the local jail during that time without care. Later on, I was able to find him in the 1900 census at the Michigan Pontiac Insane Asylum, and his job was delivering meals. He didn't die, ironically, until 1915, but he stayed at that asylum. He was not capable of taking care of himself and was adjudged by that county court as needing to be permanently in that facility. It also helped me when I realized he'd been a commercial painter. He'd been using lead paint for more than 30 years, and they were just beginning to find out what kind of effect lead paint of that type could have on people who worked, smelled, were in the element of it every single day. Helped me to understand a little, although it was very hard to see that he had made several attempts to kill my great-great-grandmother.
Hmm.
On the other hand, I got to tell you, Mary Lake's death helped my great-grandfather, William Bennett, aka Liar, Liar, Pants on Fire, invent his family tree because he didn't want anyone to know about that. So it sure didn't appear anywhere in his records, even though he'd gotten the money. He'd written lawyers back in New York and said, tell me, I think that my family is probably related to William of Orange. This was disproven much later, but I still find people in my family saying, but he wrote about it. He put a family tree together that he still said was current in 1927. So it's got to be true. No, I had to follow that for a long ways. And believe me, seeing this probate gave me a lot of the reason why he probably wanted to invent something else. I don't know if it was shame, what it was, although I can tell you that he even invented the place where he was born. And the place did not exist at the time he was born, which was another neat thing. I followed him to see if he'd ever voted or if he'd ever been a school board member or whatever in the United States, and he never had. Those were indirect evidence clues for me of what he really knew, that he really was not a U.S. citizen, that he jumped over the border and never bothered with a process early on to become a citizen. He just said he was.
Hmm.
In having that copy of the original packet, that's a hot dog argument on your side. I just want you to realize you need to be very careful. Is it an original set? Remember, a packet contains a set of documents or a process, and it may even occasionally tell you what the process is. Or is this the probate court's copy that they got that they're handing you? Always be aware that you may need to go seek other documents once you get that probate packet. There's errors that can exist or may persist in copies. I shudder to think of what my great-grandfather told his kids, that is my mom and her sisters and brother, about their history or about their family. I know one thing, my mom knew almost nothing about her Granny Mary. It just wasn't mentioned. It wasn't talked about. Also, did you get a part of the document? Did you just get a written abstract of the document? Report exactly what you received, including the date you received it and what court or what person you got that from. You may be back to get more documents. There may be more, and you want to be sure of what you have. Don't assume someone else has been thorough, like my family did with my great-grandfather. Keep it in order. Use sticky notes. That's what I use to make your observations and questions. This isn't old paper that you're looking at. You're not going to get a copy of the original, so you have copies. So it's legal to use those sticky notes to the side. And if you're going to make a sticky note, make a date on that sticky note as to your observation or what you're putting down. Because believe me, 6 weeks later, you're going to say, huh? Why did I say that? Or what did I do? Make sure that the sticky note works for you. Once you've unfolded that document, keep it that way. Keep it unfolded. Even if this is just good genealogy practice for you. No, you don't have the original. No, you don't have something that's really old, but you do have something that 20 years from now, when someone else is looking at it, needs to be in its best form and format and readable to them, not crinkly and with evidence of poor use. And be aware that there's going to be other documents referenced that are not in the packet, and get them. And when I talk about documents, I'm also going to add in something right here. Get those newspaper articles. Find out what the gossip column said. Find out what the sheriff said. It matters. Here's what I do. It's just simple. I record the witnesses, the executors, the functionaries, all of the witnesses, all of the executors, and also the beneficiaries who are listed in a particular order, and take the order that you see in the probate document or that you see in the will. I'm going to tell you, also look at the will and then look at it in the probate again, if there's a partial copy there, to see if the beneficiary list has stayed the same. When I looked at a beneficiary list in which my dad was listed in a Nebraska probate as a potential beneficiary, I found the family named in no particular order in that beneficiary list within the probate, but they were named within a specific order, beginning with oldest going down to youngest, a whole list of all of those cousins and people in the original will. So there was just a slight change there, but there was a change. Name the executor or the executors. Someone can be named an executor and decide not to do the job. So look through the records carefully to make sure of who completed the process. Or did a lawyer, with permission, complete the process for the executor? Any witnesses for anything, any property or anything else, or those people who looked at inventories or made inventories, you want to make note of those people too. I always add them right into my database, because later on, I want that database to tell me the best. That's my record. That's not just a casual thing that I would show to someone else. That's my record. If you're strictly a paper genealogist, make a copy of the probate and the will, keep it in order, number that order, note the functionaries, their jobs, and make the timeline, put it all together. You know, we do all this work and we have all of this fun with these documents. And then we had the fun, and later on, we think other people are going to understand what we did. And they don't, especially if they're not 55 to 60 years old yet and really interested in family history. Let's face it. We want your future audience to understand and never, never, never throw any of that away as too many docs, too little time to get to the place, or just cleaned it out and threw it away. You don't want all that hard work to go away. Keep your eye out for inventories and auction lists. Some of them are going to be very short. This is an official part of any probate process, whether or not the person died with a will or without a will. If you looked at mine right now in my will, I have a list of things appended to my will for things that I want to go to people that aren't necessarily listed with all of the other things in my will. And it's stated in there that my person who is my executor has 1 year to get this accomplished, to send that away. If people decide they don't want it, then that particular list is inactive after 1 year. So it has a beginning and an end date. If you are looking at an inventory, and this is an inventory from about 1780 here, you'll notice that down the side, you've got one heifer bequeathed already to Jane Ritchie. So it's named right in there in that inventory. The people who took the inventory were aware that that one heifer was already bequeathed. That's an unusual inventory because otherwise these things are up for sale in an inventory if people are going to work that way. The judge appointed 2 locals not impacted by the will to complete an inventory in a timely manner. Usually they're neighbors, someone of worth. And that's another neat thing that you're going to find when you start looking at wills. Don't be afraid when you say, oh, well, he was just a witness to a will, or she was just named as a person who worked with these reports. Don't assume that that's a small job. That's not. That's something to put into your family's history. This is not only an auction ad, I maintain it's an inventory. I'm going to read this to you. This is fun. This is in my little community in Ferndale, Montana, up in western Montana, where a fella named John Liska died. He'd been a time or two to our house for Thanksgiving. And he died September of 75 at his Ferndale home, and there were no beneficiaries known. So his went to a public administrator, even though he did have a type of will, but it just said, hey, sell everything. Well, the estate of John Liska was for sale at that 1 mile south and 1 mile east of the Ferndale School on December 13th in 1975. The buildings, this is fun, are all located on land that can be leased from the State Forestry Department for $25 a year. He was leasing that land at $25 a year. So anything he built through all the years had to either be moved or you had to take up that lease. And also, with the particular buildings. So there's a 6-room house, a well house, a roof cellar, 2 wood sheds, a hay shed, a horse barn, a granary, 2 garages, and 2 chicken houses. Can you imagine that? And by the way, they were offering lunch too that day for people who were there because it was going to take some time to go through this. The personal property and many antiques, household goods, 6 guns, fishing tackle, many traps, a 31 International truck, a 53 Nash car, an enamel kitchen wood range, chainsaws, a boat, some very old trunks, very old mantel clock, a bullet mold, wood heaters, a small Caterpillar tractor with a dozer, forge halters, saddle and tack, brass and iron beds, a wine barrel, cream cans, stock tanks, 100 bales of grass hay, old brass spyglass, lots of furniture, and there was also forks and axes and shovels and chains and many small tools, too small to say. So people were there for the total day to get that. And then the objects were sold. And, I'm still trying to find out what happened after the sale. The Missoulian failed me. They didn't report anymore on this particular thing. But isn't that a pretty neat, not only auction ad, but kind of an informal inventory of the inventory that had been taken? He had a lot of stuff. So your best conclusion for any of this occurs when you have the original or a proven transcription of the will or probate, and you write your own conclusion of the materials you received. I'm just going to tell you how I start mine. This appears to be an exact copy of the original will, if you have a will in front of you. It lists the known family members in total, pending identification of contested factors. And mine will always say at the end, there were no contested factors. I've never had one that went through a contest. So I haven't had that fun yet. Mine will also say other possible beneficiaries are listed and the property conveyance is completed according to the court documents. Now, in this last one with John Liska, well, the state government gave him a little bit of time to get that process completed and to get someone else in there. And if they didn't sell the buildings or whatever, I'm assuming that the next person just got them. And there was a final accounting of the estate as evidenced by a final court hearing. Then you write the rest of your report or conclusion here, but you write a report including who got what. and when. I haven't even discussed any of the things today that have to do with widows who might be entitled to more of the estate and aren't even named within probate practices in states that do not have the UBC. So I hope that this is a start for you. What I've told you today is a start for you, not a finish. I hope you don't think that it's going to be a hard or a long process, or that you just get the probate documents and say, I'll do my Snoopy dance. I got the probate, and not do anything with it, because that would be a shame. You are going to find out so much.
Mhm.
So I'm going to stop my share.
When somebody contests the will.
Oh, he says, how does it look when somebody contests the will? Well, they promptly go into court, usually with a document in which they formally declare that they are contesting the will, and then everything changes, because there are at least, depending on the state, 30 to 60 days, Gary, for people to respond to that contested action. And then the court dates will start with the judge, but the judge at that point, who is in charge of that court, is going to ask for some explanations, and they better be good.